The Attic Secret. Sunbeams, thick with swirling particles, pierced the gloom of the attic. Billy choked, swatting at the air. Stale lavender and the ghosts of forgotten objects hung heavy in the stillness. He knew he was trespassing. Mom's warning echoed in his head. Too unsafe, Billy. Faulty wiring, weak floors. But she couldn't grasp its significance. Grandpa Joe had cherished this space, calling it his thinkatorium. He edged deeper in, each footfall eliciting a mournful creak from the aged floorboards. He pictured himself years ago, his small hand engulfed in Grandpa Joe's, the rough stairs, a tactile memory against his skin. Up here, Grandpa Joe spun yarns of daring pirates and buried riches, each tale sparked by the time-worn artifacts surrounding them, a doll with a cracked face and empty stare, bound stacks of aged newsprint, a rocking horse forever stilled by a missing limb. But now the attic felt hollow, beyond its physical emptiness, as if a vital essence had been excised from both the house and Billy himself. He longed for Grandpa Joe's resonant laughter, the mischievous glint in his eyes during his outlandish stories, the familiar pressure of his hand on Billy's shoulder. He drifted past a row of trunks, their brass locks dulled with age. Tracing a finger across a dusty gramophone, he conjured Grandpa Joe winding it up, the music crackling to life, filling the space with its vintage sounds. He could almost hear his off-key humming, accompanied by a wide, joyous grin. A knot tightened in Billy's throat. He swallowed hard, fighting back the tears that threatened to overwhelm him. He needed to unearth something, anything, that would bridge the gap to Grandpa Joe, allowing him to sense his presence, if only fleetingly. In the dimmest corner, a jumbled pile of old quilts concealed something intriguing behind a listing bookshelf, an unusual shape, unlike any other object in the room. A wave of nervous energy propelled Billy forward, tearing away the fabric, unleashing another cloud of swirling dust motes. Tucked amidst the musty folds was a radio, not like any he'd ever encountered. A grand piece of craftsmanship, constructed from deep, lustrous wood, adorned with elaborate carvings. Knobs and dials covered the front panel, each bearing faded inscriptions. A small clock was embedded in the center, its hands frozen at 3:17. Billy's pulse quickened. Had Grandpa Joe kept this hidden? Was this the attic's hidden treasure? He carefully hefted the radio, surprised by its weight. Carrying it to the single window, he placed it on a small table. The sunlight revealed its intricate details, the subtle artistry of its design. It possessed a peculiar beauty, almost a magical aura. Running his hand over the cool, polished wood, he felt a profound connection to it, to Grandpa Joe. This radio, it resonated with significance. He reached for the power knob, his fingers trembling slightly. He drew a deep breath and rotated it. Silence. He tried again, turning it further. Still nothing. He experimented with the other knobs, adjusting volume and frequency, but the radio remained stubbornly mute. An oppressive quiet filled the attic. Disappointment washed over him, a cold tide of despair. He had hoped. He had imagined the radio would somehow conjure Grandpa Joe's spirit, even briefly, that it would echo with his favorite song or transmit his familiar voice. But it was merely a broken relic, a useless machine. He sank onto a nearby stool, gazing at the inert radio. The dust motes continued their silent ballet in the sunbeams, indifferent to his dashed hopes. The attic remained hushed, laden with the weight of vanished memories. He sat there for an extended period, lost in contemplation, the silent radio, a poor substitute for the comfort he craved. He couldn't resurrect Grandpa Joe, he realized, but perhaps, just perhaps, He could discover a way to perpetuate his legacy, and maybe, just maybe, this radio held the key. He resolved to find someone to repair it. He would restore it to working order, regardless of the obstacles, because this radio, he instinctively knew, was more than just defunct technology. It was a tangible link to the past, a connection to the person he cherished, and he wasn't prepared to sever that connection just yet. Voices from tomorrow. Billy Thompson bolted upright in bed, heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. A faint, almost imperceptible hum had wormed its way into his dream, dragging him back to wakefulness. He squinted in the pre-dawn gloom, the digital clock on his bedside table blinking 5:17 a.m. in menacing red numerals. He strained his ears. The hum was still there, a low thrumming that seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards. It was coming from the attic, or rather, from what he'd brought down from the attic. He threw back the covers, his bare feet hitting the cold wooden floor. He crept towards the corner of his room where the hulking Philco radio sat on a small, rickety table. It hadn't made a peep since he'd lugged it down from his grandfather's attic weeks ago, declaring it his personal project. Now, its vacuum tubes were glowing with an eerie, internal light, casting long, dancing shadows across the walls. The humming intensified as he approached. It wasn't just a hum anymore. It was laced with static, a crackling energy that made the hairs on his arms stand on end. He reached out a tentative hand, hovering just above the polished wood casing. Suddenly, the static resolved into a voice. It wasn't a clear, human voice, more like a garbled transmission struggling to break through layers of interference. Tuesday, November 14th. High of 68 degrees, scattered showers in the afternoon. Be sure to bring an umbrella. Billy froze. Today was Tuesday, November 14th. But the weather report this morning had predicted sunshine and a high of 75. The voice continued, unfazed. School lunch will be sloppy joes, and those terrible tater tots that nobody likes. Billy's stomach lurched. Sloppy joes were on the lunch menu today. Mrs. Davison had even mentioned the tater tots just yesterday. He hadn't looked at the lunch menu this morning. How could it know? He took a step back, his mind reeling. This was impossible. Radios didn't predict the future, especially not old clunkers that had sat untouched for decades. Traffic accident reported on Elm Street at 8:15 a.m. Avoid that route if possible. Elm Street? That's the road he took to school. He edged closer, fear warring with a morbid fascination. The voice was monotone, devoid of emotion, like a computer reading out data. It felt wrong somehow, alien. The volume increased slightly, the static momentarily clearing, and a reminder to Billy Thompson, do not forget your history report. Mr. Harrison will not accept late submissions. Billy's breath hitched. It knew his name. He hadn't told anyone about the radio, not even his best friend, Mark. How could it possibly know his name, let alone his looming history report deadline? The humming escalated, the glowing tubes burning brighter. The voice was fading, devolving back into static. Remember, Tuesday, Elm. Then, silence. The tubes dimmed, the eerie glow receding, until only the faint warmth remained. The humming ceased, leaving behind only the pounding of Billy's heart in the stillness of his room. He stared at the radio, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and dread. What had he just heard? Was it a prank, a hallucination? Or something far stranger, something he couldn't even begin to comprehend? He glanced at the clock, 5:23 a.m. He had to get ready for school, but he couldn't shake the feeling that today was going to be unlike any other, and not in a good way. He thought about Elm Street, and he thought about an umbrella, testing the future. The radio hummed, a low thrum that vibrated through the floorboards and into Billy's teeth. He shivered, pulling the scratchy wool blanket tighter around his shoulders. Dawn was still hours away, but sleep was impossible. The radio had spoken again. He fumbled for the notepad he'd started keeping beside the bed, the pencil lead snapping as he pressed too hard. Grimacing, he sharpened it with his pocket knife, the metallic rasp, a jarring sound in the silent room. He wrote quickly, capturing the fragmented sentences the radio had spat out. Mrs. Gable's prize, winning roses, ravaged by hail, despite clear skies. The flagpole at the school, snapped in half, precisely at 10:17 a.m. A white sedan, Elm Street, a near miss, involving a dog named Winston. He stared at the list, the words swimming on the page. It was insane, impossible. Yet, the memory of the previous day's pronouncements, each one playing out with unnerving accuracy, clawed at his reason. He capped the pen, a click that echoed in the stillness of the attic, and forced himself to lie back down. He didn't sleep. The first prediction began playing out before homeroom. He'd walked to school with his friend, Maria, the morning air crisp and cool. The sky was a flawless, cloudless blue. Then, rounding the corner onto Oak Street, they saw it. Mrs. Gable, her face a mask of bewildered fury, stood amidst a scene of floral carnage. Her meticulously cultivated rose bushes were shredded, petals scattered across the lawn like crimson confetti. Hailstones, small and icy, crunched under their feet. Maria gasped, but Billy just stared, a knot tightening in his stomach. The flagpole incident occurred with chilling precision. Billy watched the clock in history class, each second a hammer blow against his skull. At 10:16 a.m., he felt a wave of nausea. Then, a sharp crack, like a gunshot, reverberated through the building. A collective gasp rippled through the classroom as everyone rushed to the windows. The flagpole, a proud symbol of the school, lay broken at its base. The near miss on Elm Street happened on his way home. He detoured to avoid seeing Mrs. Gable again, the image of her ruined roses still fresh in his mind. As he crossed Elm, a flash of white caught his eye. A sedan, gleaming in the afternoon sun, screeched to a halt, its tires protesting loudly. A small, fluffy dog, a Samoyed he guessed, yipped frantically, darting back towards the curb. A woman, pale and shaken, emerged from the car, scooping up the dog and burying her face in its fur. Billy recognized her as the owner of Winston's Pet Emporium. He walked the rest of the way home in a daze, the world around him seeming unreal, a stage set for a macabre play he was forced to watch. The radio's predictions weren't just coming true, they were happening with a terrifying specificity that defied explanation. Back in the attic, the radio sat silent, its dial glowing with an eerie green light. Billy approached it cautiously, as if it were a venomous snake. He reached out, his fingers trembling, and touched the cold, smooth surface of the Bakelite casing. "Who are you?" He whispered, his voice barely audible. "What are you?" The radio remained silent, offering no answers. He spent the evening poring over the notepad, rereading the predictions, searching for a pattern, a clue, anything that could explain the impossible. He felt a strange mixture of fear and fascination, a morbid curiosity that he couldn't suppress. He knew he should destroy the radio, get rid of it before it brought more chaos and dread into his life. But he couldn't. He was drawn to it, compelled to understand its power, even if it meant risking everything. The silence of the house pressed in on him, amplifying the frantic thump of his heart. He knew he'd be back in the attic later, waiting, listening for the radio to speak again, ready to write down whatever horrors it planned to unleash on the world. The missing pup. Static crackled, a prelude to the usual late-night broadcast of whispers and premonitions. Billy lay rigid in bed, his breath shallow against the damp pillow. Tonight, the air in his room felt thick, almost suffocating. The clock radio glowed a sickly green, each second a hammer blow against his skull. Then, the voice, smooth as polished obsidian, cut through the noise. Tonight, a tragedy will befall the Henderson family. Buster, their beloved golden retriever, will go missing. Last seen chasing squirrels near Oak Street. The family is advised to check the woods behind their property. Billy bolted upright, his heart hammering against his ribs. Buster. He knew Buster. The friendly dog always wagged his tail when Billy walked past the Hendersons' house. A wave of nausea washed over him. He had to do something. He scrambled out of bed, pulling on jeans and a t-shirt. He didn't bother with socks. He had to warn them. He tiptoed down the creaking stairs, careful to avoid the step that always groaned the loudest. The house was silent, swallowed by the deep, impenetrable dark of the pre-dawn hours. He slipped out the front door, the cool night air a welcome slap to his face. The Hendersons' house was only 2 doors down. He ran, his bare feet slapping against the cold asphalt. The porch light was off, the house a dark silhouette against the inky sky. He hesitated, then rang the doorbell, his knuckles rapping against the wood with a frantic urgency. A light flicked on upstairs. A moment later, Mr. Henderson, his face creased with sleep, opened the door a crack. "Billy, what in the world?" "Mr. Henderson, Buster, he's going to go missing." Billy blurted out, his words tumbling over each other. "I heard it on the radio. You need to keep him inside." Mr. Henderson blinked, his expression shifting from annoyance to confusion. "Missing? Billy, it's 3 in the morning. What are you talking about?" He smelled faintly of stale beer and sleep. "The radio. It said Buster will chase squirrels near Oak Street and then he'll be gone. You have to keep him safe." Billy pleaded, his voice cracking with desperation. "Mr. Do 3. Henderson sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Billy, I appreciate your concern, but Buster's a smart dog. He doesn't just wander off, and I highly doubt a radio knows what my dog is going to do. Now, go home and get some sleep." He started to close the door. "But Mr. Henderson—" "Good night, Billy," he said firmly, and shut the door. Billy stood there for a moment, defeated. He wanted to bang on the door, scream at him to believe him, but he knew it was useless. He turned and trudged back home, the ominous words of the radio echoing in his mind. He couldn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling, the faint glow of the clock radio, a constant reminder of the impending disaster. When the first streaks of dawn painted the sky, he got up again. He couldn't just sit there and wait. He walked to the Hendersons' house again, his stomach churning with anxiety. This time, the porch light was on, and the front door was wide open. Mrs. Henderson stood on the porch, her face pale and drawn, her voice tight with panic. "Have you seen Buster?" she asked, her eyes darting around. "He got out sometime this morning. We can't find him anywhere." Billy's breath hitched. Oak Street, the woods, the radio. It was all happening. He shook his head, unable to speak. The radio had been right. Again, a cold dread seeped into his bones. What was going to happen next, and could he stop it? "Secrets next door." Static hissed from the radio, a serpent's whisper slithering into Billy's room. He'd been half asleep, sprawled across his bed with a comic book, but the noise yanked him awake. The digital clock, usually a blur of green in the dimness, glared 17 a.m. The radio shouldn't be on. He hadn't touched it since the last unsettling broadcast. Then a voice, crackling and distorted, cut through the static. It wasn't the usual pronouncements of future catastrophes or cryptic warnings. This was different. Gossip. Malicious, historical gossip. Agnes Gable, formerly Agnes Moreau, embroiled in the infamous Blackwood scandal of '58. Fled the state, changed her name, and seemingly vanished. But some secrets, folks, just won't stay buried. More on this at the top of the hour. Billy sat bolt upright. Mrs. Gable, his Mrs. Gable, the one who always offered him cookies and told stories about her prize-winning begonias. The image seemed absurd. He'd always thought she was just old, harmless. A little eccentric, maybe, with her mismatched floral dresses and the way she talked to the squirrels in her yard. He scrambled out of bed, padded to the window, and peered through the gap in his curtains. Mrs. Gable's house was dark, silent. Only the faint glow of the streetlight illuminated her meticulously manicured lawn. He couldn't imagine her embroiled in anything scandalous, let alone something that happened over 60 years ago. The radio continued to hiss, now playing a scratchy rendition of a big band song. Billy turned it off, the sudden silence amplifying the frantic thumping of his heart. Blackwood scandal? What could that even mean? He spent the next hour tossing and turning, the radio's revelation a knot in his stomach. He knew he shouldn't believe everything he heard, especially from that thing. But the voice had been so specific, so certain, and the way it had said her name, Agnes Gable, with a knowing emphasis, sent chills down his spine. The next morning, the sun felt accusatory, shining too brightly on the ordinary world. He usually waved to Mrs. Gable as he walked to the bus stop, but today he hesitated. He saw her tending her roses, her back to him. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and blooming petals. He almost walked past, pretending he didn't see her, but something compelled him to speak. "Good morning, Mrs. Gable." She turned, her eyes, usually crinkled in a perpetual smile, seemed guarded. "Good morning, Billy," she said, her voice a little too bright, a little too forced. He couldn't help himself. Did you hear anything strange on the radio last night?" Her smile vanished. A flicker of something, fear, crossed her face, gone so quickly he almost thought he imagined it. "The radio? No, dear, I haven't listened to the radio in years. Too much noise, not enough music." She snipped a dead bloom with unnecessary force. He wanted to press her, to ask about Blackwood, about Agnes Moreau, but the words caught in his throat. He felt like he was betraying her even by just knowing. "Oh, okay," just wondered. He hurried away, the weight of her unspoken secrets pressing down on him. He glanced back once and saw her watching him, her expression unreadable. The sun glinted off her gardening shears, turning them into something sharp and dangerous. The bus ride was a blur. He couldn't shake the feeling that he'd seen something he wasn't supposed to see, uncovered something that was better left buried. If Mrs. Gable was hiding something, what else was being kept secret in his town, and who could he even trust? The radio, for all its disturbing pronouncements, had at least been consistent. People apparently were not. The library fire, static electricity buzzed, then a voice, fractured and desperate, sliced through the tranquility of Billy's room. Inferno, historical society, library, consumed, multiple casualties, fire, trapped, Billy bolted upright, his pulse a frantic drum solo against his ribs. The clock radio cast an eerie green glow. 3:17 a.m. He scrabbled for the dial, silencing the intrusive sound, yet the voice lingered, a spectral echo in the darkness. Structural failure imminent. Fire crews overwhelmed. Jenkins, stuck in the rare books room. Jenkins. It had to be Walt Jenkins, the town's devout historian. He practically inhabited the place. Billy threw off the bedclothes, a film of cold sweat glazing his skin. This dwarfed any minor incident. This was devastating. He wrestled on jeans and a t-shirt, his trembling hands nearly tearing the cloth. He had to alert someone. He had to reach Walt. The library was just a few blocks distant. He sprinted, the crisp night air stinging his lungs, a vision of ravenous flames clawing at the historic building already branded onto his mind. He hammered on the massive oak doors, his cries for Walt hoarse and ragged. Walt, the library, fire, silence. Only the crickets serenaded the manicured grounds. He tested the handle. Locked tight, naturally. He circled the structure, peering into opaque windows. Nothing stirred. A lamp glowed dimly in the caretaker's cottage behind the main building. Old Mr. Bevan. Henderson, a sour-faced codger resembling a badger, was likely up. Billy pounded on the cottage door. An eternity later, the door grated open, revealing Mr. Poot. Henderson in a worn bathrobe, a shotgun cradled in his arms. "What in blazes?" Henderson muttered, peering at Billy through thick lenses. "The library. It's going up in flames. Walt Jenkins is inside." Billy panted, gesturing wildly toward the silent, looming structure. Henderson lowered the shotgun fractionally, but maintained his grip. "Burn down? What are you babbling about, boy? Been dipping into something you shouldn't." "The radio. I overheard it on the radio. They said the library's going to ignite. Walt's stuck in the rare book section." Henderson's lip curled in disdain. "The radio? You rousted me out of bed at this ungodly hour because of something you picked up on the radio. Go home, Billy. You're dreaming." He began to shut the door. "But Mr. Henderson, please, it's really happening. You must believe me," Billy begged, wedging his foot in the jam. Henderson sighed, a plume of stale breath clouding the air. "Listen, Billy, while I appreciate your concern, I am sure the volunteer firefighters and library staff are aware of the situation. I'll check it out for you in the morning." He slammed the portal shut. Billy stood there, crestfallen, the image of the burning library sharpening in his mind. He raced to the nearest phone booth, the cold metal chilling his perspiring palms. He punched in 911. 911. "What's your emergency?" A flat voice responded. "The library, the town library. It's about to catch fire. Someone is trapped inside." Billy yelled into the mouthpiece. "Okay, son, stay calm. What's your name and address?" "Billy Thompson, 14 Maple Street. But listen, you have to dispatch someone to the library immediately. It's going to burn." "Okay, Billy, we'll send someone over to take a look, but you need to remain calm and stay at your residence." Billy slammed down the receiver. "Take a look?" By the time they took a look, it would be charcoal. He glared back at the library, a monstrous shape against the faint light. He had tried. He had sounded the alarm. But nobody took him seriously. The radio had offered a glimpse of the future, and no one would heed the warning. He could almost taste the smoke, a bitter undercurrent in the air. The relentless weight of impending doom crushed him. All that remained was to wait, whispers in the dark. The hum returned, not a gentle drone this time, but a grating vibration that resonated through the floor and churned inside Billy. He froze in bed, sheets clutched tight, his gaze fixed on the inky blackness blooming in the corners of his room. Silvery bars of moonlight sliced across the floorboards, illuminating drifting dust motes in the still air. He struggled to hear past the frantic drumbeat in his chest. Then, a voice. Not the impersonal baritone of the newscaster, but something invasive, intimate, a secret rasp directly into his eardrum through a veil of static. "Billy?" He gulped, the taste of acid sharp in his throat. He hadn't confided his name to anyone, not truly. Maybe mumbled it at the corner store, but never clearly, never aloud. "Afraid, Billy?" "You ought to be. You're hardly known for your courage, are you? More like a disappointment. Certainly, to your father." The words sank in like splinters, igniting the buried truth. His dad never voiced it, but Billy felt the weight of unrealized expectations, the unspoken yearning for a football star, a valedictorian, anyone but him. He clamped his eyes shut, praying for the voice to vanish, for this to dissolve into a bad dream, conjured from his own insecurities. But the voice persisted, relentless in its dissection. Such an isolated boy, rattling around in this enormous house, no confidant, no one who truly understands. It knew about the soul-crushing loneliness, those hours spent lost amidst the dusty relics of his grandfather's life in the attic. It knew the shame he carried, the secret he guarded, the one he'd never dared to share with another living soul. And then there's the shadow, Billy. Have you perceived it? Always at the periphery, lurking just beyond your focus, watching, anticipating. A glacial wave of dread washed through him. His eyes snapped open, dotting wildly. The moonlight seemed to deepen the gloom, twisting familiar shapes into menacing specters. He saw nothing, yet the sensation of being observed intensified, a crawling prickle at the nape of his neck. Don't bother searching. It's sly. It only materializes when your gaze is averted. But it's present, Billy, I assure you, perpetually hovering behind you, a constant reminder. He longed to scream, but his throat had seized up. He was trapped, pinned under the oppressive weight of his fear. He attempted to anchor himself to the ordinary, the flaking paint of the ceiling, the delicate fragrance of lavender drifting from his grandmother's forgotten sachets, the steady cadence of the grandfather clock from downstairs. But the voice wouldn't relent. "It thrives on your anxieties, Billy. Your fear empowers it. And believe me, Billy, you have ample reason to be terrified." The hum crescendoed, a shattering roar assaulting his eardrums. Again, he squeezed his eyes shut, clamping his hands over his ears, but the voice knifed through, a sliver of ice boring into his mind. "Sleep tight, Billy. Don't let the shadows consume you." Then, complete silence. The oppressive hum receded, leaving a hollow, ringing void. The grandfather clock chimed once, a somber knell that echoed through the still house. Billy lay petrified, listening to his own ragged breaths. He couldn't bring himself to open his eyes. He knew, with a certainty that sunk like lead in his stomach, that the shadow remained. Lurking, ever watchful, and now he was trapped in that vigil as well, waiting for the unknown, waiting for whatever malevolent design the radio held for him, waiting for a dawn that seemed impossibly distant. Family secrets. "Mom," Billy whispered, padding into the kitchen. The linoleum was cold under his bare feet. Maggie Thompson sat at the table, illuminated by the harsh glare of the overhead light, a mountain of bills spread before her like a losing hand of cards. She looked exhausted, the lines around her eyes etched deeper than usual. She didn't look up. "Billy, what are you doing up? It's late." I need to tell you something. He hesitated, suddenly feeling foolish. How could he explain the impossible? Maggie sighed, pushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear. Can it wait, honey? I'm trying to figure out how we're going to keep the lights on this month. No, Mom, it can't. It's about Grandpa's radio. Her head snapped up, her gaze sharp. The radio? What about it? He swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. It turned on by itself, and it was saying things about things that haven't happened yet. He rushed on, desperate to get it all out. And there was this shadow, Mom, a dark shape in the corner. It felt wrong. Maggie stared at him, her expression unreadable. Then she gave a short, humorless laugh. Billy, honey, you're grieving. You're imagining things. Grandpa was a good man, but he loved his gadgets. Probably just a short circuit. But Mom, I'm telling you, it was real. It knew things. He leaned closer, lowering his voice. It knew about the accident on Elm Street before it even happened. She reached out and took his hand, her touch surprisingly cold. Honey, grief does strange things to people. You loved your grandpa very much. It's natural to be upset, to feel like things aren't right, but you need to get some sleep. Everything will look better in the morning. He pulled his hand away, a knot forming in his stomach. She wasn't listening, or worse, she was pretending not to. He noticed her hands were shaking slightly as she gathered the bills. I'm telling you the truth, Mom, he insisted. Maggie stood abruptly, pushing her chair back with a screech. I said, go to bed, Billy. I'm not in the mood for ghost stories. Her voice was sharper than he'd heard in a long time. She avoided his gaze, busying herself by stacking the bills into neat piles. Defeated, Billy turned to leave. As he reached the doorway, a flicker of static crackled from the living room. He froze. The radio. He ran back, Maggie close behind. The radio glowed, its dial illuminated an eerie green. A voice, distorted and crackling, filled the room. It wasn't the same voice he'd heard before. This one was older, deeper, laced with a haunting sorrow. July 14th, 1938, the storm was raging. The lake took them all. Thomas, Mary, little Elizabeth, gone. The radio, it was their lifeline, their only connection to the outside world. But it failed. It always fails. Maggie gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Her face had gone pale, and her eyes widened with a terror he'd never seen before. The voice continued, its tone growing more frantic. The Thompson Radio Company, a legacy of broken promises. We tried to warn them. We knew the design was flawed. But Thomas wouldn't listen. He was so proud, he wouldn't listen. Now they're all gone. The radio went silent. The green glow of the dial faded, leaving the room plunged back into darkness. Billy stared at his mom, his heart pounding in his chest. Her eyes were filled with tears. Mom, he whispered, what was that about? She didn't answer. She just stood there, frozen in place, her face a mask of grief and something else, something he couldn't quite decipher, a secret she'd been carrying for a very long time. The weight of it seemed to age her before his very eyes. Then she turned and fled, disappearing into the hallway and slamming her bedroom door shut, leaving Billy alone in the eerie silence, the radio a cold, accusing presence in the corner of the room. The Thompson Radio Company, a legacy of broken promises. What had his grandfather done, and what did any of it have to do with him? The final countdown. A maelstrom of static battered Billy's skull, a relentless white squall threatening to unravel his mind. He groped for the shutoff, fingers clumsy with a cold sweat, but the dial offered only futile resistance. His grandfather's zenith, a relic of bygone days, pulsed with a malevolent energy, mocking his efforts. Then, breaking through the cacophony, a voice, crystalline and chilling, announced, "Billy Thompson, termination imminent, 3:17 a.m., October 27th. A previously blank display ignited on the radio's facade, numerals glowing with an infernal luminescence. The numbers blurred before him, 0, 58, 32. Less than an hour remained. Panic seized him, a constricting band around his lungs. He recoiled, scattering a teetering pyramid of aged books. The countdown's cadence echoed in the confined space, each tick a hammer blow against his sanity. It had to cease. He had to stop it now. He surged forward, wrenching the power cord from its socket. The static gasped, then vanished, leaving the attic in a comparative hush. Yet the crimson digits persisted, emblazoned against the gloom. 0, 50, 7, 19. The timer existed within. "No," he choked out, his voice raw. He seized the radio, its heavy casing strangely warm, almost sentient. With a strangled cry, he smashed it against the wooden floorboards. Splintered wood, shattered glass, expiring vacuum tubes, a symphony of destruction. Yet, impossibly, the clock remained, its implacable countdown continuing. 0, 50, 6, 4. He lashed out at the wreckage, a primal scream bubbling up his throat, futile. Obliterating the device hadn't erased the message, hadn't silenced the voice. It resonated within him, a creeping dread poisoning his thoughts. He crumpled to his knees amidst the debris, his chest heaving, tears coursing down his face. Understanding dawned. The radio wasn't the source, merely a conduit, a harbinger. The true genesis of this terror resided within him, in the shadowed corners of his psyche. The lurking phantom, the one glimpsed at the periphery of his vision, wasn't external. It was his own mortality, the unavoidable truth he had desperately sought to evade. The radio had only amplified his dread, giving it a voice, a deadline. He shut his eyes, attempting to regulate his breathing, to discover a sliver of calm within the inner tempest. He recalled his mother, her comforting smile, her uncanny ability to soothe his anxieties. He pictured Sarah, her laughter ringing in his memory. He reflected on his life, its tapestry of joy and sorrow, triumph and despair. A peculiar serenity then descended, not surrender, but a quiet acceptance. He could not halt the countdown, could not cheat his fate, but he could dictate his response. He could confront it with fortitude, with honor, with affection. He inhaled deeply and opened his eyes. He was in his bed. Sunlight streamed through the window, bathing the room in a gentle, golden aura. The digital clock on his nightstand displayed 7:14 a.m. Silence emanated from the radio. He sat upright, his heart a frantic drum, the sheets clinging to his skin, saturated with sweat. A dream, a ghastly nightmare. Yet the fear persisted, a frigid weight in his stomach. He knew with a bone-chilling conviction that the message, the countdown, hadn't truly dissipated. It lay dormant, concealed within the shadows, poised to resurface at the most inopportune moment.